Titled A Time to Care will be launched at a press conference in Johannesburg at Oxfam South Africa's offices. What is this all about? Well, as you notice, I'm missing my partner in crime, so to speak. Desiree Chauke is out and about covering the launch of this report. She joins us now live. Hey Dee, very good morning to you. So tell us a bit about the contents of this report. What can we expect?
A very good morning, Blaine, and a good morning to our viewers as well. We're here at the Oxfam building in Braamfontein, where they're launching that report today with, of course, the theme, as you said, a time to care. It's focusing really on the cost of unpaid care work to the tune of trillions of dollars annually, looking at the work, the care work that women and girls undertake and not being paid for this. Let's bring into our conversation now Sipho Ntati. She's the Executive Director for Oxfam South Africa. Very good morning to you.
Thanks for talking to us, Desiree.
What's the prevalence of unpaid care work? Let's start here in South Africa and perhaps have a global look as well.
Yeah. So globally, 42% of women are currently women globally are currently engaged in unpaid work, and which means that those are women who are not able to participate in the economy, and so they are outside of the labor market. So that's how big this problem is. And as the report says, this contribution amounts to $10.98 trillion globally. And so it's a massive contribution. And really what we're saying with this report is the inequality crisis. It's time to care about the inequality crisis. It's time to care about the fact that every single aspect of it plays itself across women's lives.
You're saying the problem is also founded on sexism, which speaks to the general or the overall issue of patriarchy.
So the brokenness of the global economy is as a result of the fact that it's not only favoring the few, but it's also, disadvantaging women. So while women are making this huge contribution and are stepping into the gaps, that our report is talking about, when governments fail to provide the services that societies need for care, it is women who step into those roles, and it is girls who have to fill the gap. And so we are saying that, for instance, in the context of South Africa, we know that we're entering the era of austerity, where government is going to spend less, on public services. And when we are saying it cannot be that women have to pay the cost of government failures.
So how do you propose for government to get involved?
So, the report makes a range of recommendations. One of the recommendations that feminists have made over time is that it's time that we approached the budgeting processes from a gender accountable lens. So when governments are making these decisions about what to allocate for where, it must not be that we are reducing investment in public services, because again, who is going to pay for that? It's women and girls. And we are suggesting that it's time that the private sector came on board, particularly making sure that companies pay fair tax, because remember that tax is money that goes into the public fiscus. And when corporations don't pay their fair share of tax, they're taking away from the capacity of governments to provide these services and deflecting the burden onto women. And we've seen how everything that we look at as a crisis, whether it's lack of electricity or whether it's the water crisis in this country, is a women's problem, because who manages water in households and who is responsible for making sure that there's water for cooking and other things?
It's an opportune time to have this conversation as we looking up to February, the budget speech time. How are you interacting with Treasury on this conversation?
So Treasury will get copies of the report, and we'll be making representations as part of the women's movement in this country, who actually for the last 2.5 decades have been saying this, that we have to reimagine the economy, we have to reimagine the way we invest in public services. We have to reimagine the way that we collect money so that there is enough, because women understood already at the advent of democracy that if this country had to be fair and just, it had to make sure that women are not locked into these slave roles, and that society invests and doesn't continue to extract their labor for free in the ways that is currently happening, and that corporations pay their fair share, and that the government listens to what it is that will enable societies to continue without that being the burden of women.
How did you go about interrogating this very important societal subject, and who was your sample?
So the way we do these reports globally is that we look at the global inequality picture, and then of course in this case we take the lens of women and how they are positioned in the economy. For the last 5 years as Oxfam, we've said the global economy is broken, and this year we are saying there is a dimension that needs to be particularly focused on, especially as we see that the way the crisis is entrenching, we're seeing debt, countries becoming more indebted, and as I said, we re-entering the new era of austerity, and we're saying we have to make sure that whatever decisions are being made in South Africa, where our economy is already entered technical recession, that we have to make sure that women are not paying the cost, and we have to make sure that it's redistributed. And in this case, conversations about how to rebuild the economy must do more than just include women tokenistically. It must be done on the basis of a deep listening to women and how it is that we can ensure that societies stand despite the crisis.
Is on care work, and then you say it traps women in the self-reinforcing cycle of income and time poverty. How would you describe care work? And also, your direction is to talk to government about incorporating a sensitivity to gender issues when they're putting up their budgets. But how do we deal with society itself in terms of entrenched societal roles?
Yeah. So one of the things we are saying in the report is that families, communities, also have to have an attitude change. It cannot be that women are expected to perform this labor for free as an act of love, which is a very generalized perception that women can just, care for the sick, women can just, come in when people are being sent away from hospitals because the care is not there. When primary crashes are not available, women can just step into the gap, and the government doesn't have to invest in that. And also that capital can continue to pay slave wages, which means that families are not able to sustain themselves and buy some of these services. And of course, we see how in the work we do, you have a woman who sometimes is working, let's say a domestic worker, but at the end of the day, having performed, the paid care work, poorly paid often, she still has to come in and look after the children, cook for the family, care for the sick, and if somebody is sick, it's the woman often who has to step in and figure out how to care for that person. And we are saying men have a role. In transforming this. It's not just about what governments do, because the side of this oppression of women begins at the home and begins in communities. And so transformation has to happen, and we have to, look at how we solve this thing. I mean, we know that South Africa has one of the largest number of absent fathers, and I'm not saying that when men are present, they actually do, support, in care work duties, because many do not, and that's the thing that has to change. And so there has to be change at the level of, families and society, and there has to be a change of attitude in the government that enables, and of course, corporations have to play their role, in transforming this. It can't just be that we work at one level and don't transform the attitudes.
All right, our conversation has been centering mostly on prevailing circumstances in South Africa, but in terms of the global picture, how does this scourge manifest in the different countries that you hope to impact on?
So one of the things we're saying in the report is that this is obviously a global problem, and its root, is in the way that the global economy is structured to benefit the few. On the one hand, you have this situation that 22 billionaires own the total wealth of all of Africa's women combined. And how does that happen? It happens because many do not pay their fair share of tax, which means that governments can't then provide the services as they should. And that happens, across the world, where, as I said before, the shocking statistics of how 42% of the world's women and girls are out of the labor market because they're locked in these, in this unpaid care work because, governments are not stepping in.
We know we have to let you go because you have to go to the launch. Sipho Mtati is the Executive Director of Oxfam in South Africa. Thank you so much for talking to us. We're going into the launch conversation, that media briefing, and we'll bring you the details thereof later on. Thanks, and it's back to Joburg.
All right, Desiree Chauke live for us. They're covering the launch of this report, the Oxfam report. We understand it's happening at about 10:30 or so we'll try to catch up with Desiree a little later on. We're going to take a quick break.